as we welcome you inside our studio here on NBC today. Tim Howard, Gary Neville, Rebecca Lowe. Pretty good timing having two former Manchester United players to talk about the story that broke as we were waking up this morning, Gary. David Ornstein, Laurie Whitwell, Adam Crafton breaking it in The Athletic. Dan Ashworth has left his job. The club say it's mutual. The reports around it say he was pushed. Your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, something like that can't be mutual. I think when Ineos came in to Manchester United, everyone knew that there was going to be huge changes. There has been massive redundancies within the club, a complete overhaul of the executive of the club in terms of the CEO, CFO, sporting director, technical director, manager, obviously, just recently as well. And you would have expected large changes, but not changes for this position. You know, Dan Ashworth was headhunted for many, many months. He was obviously chased for about 10 months. I think he was on gardening leave for 4 or 5 months. He was paid millions of pounds for. I worked with Dan Ashworth at the FA for probably 2 years, and he's been very successful wherever he's been, at Brighton, West Brom, the FA, at Newcastle most recently. I'm really shocked this morning that this has happened, and it's not a great look at all. It's something that's going to need a lot of explaining, and I think that the statement that the club have put out is really poor.
Let's have a look at that statement. It's very short. It came out just a couple of hours ago. As Gary says, he's not impressed with it. They said this, United. Dan Ashworth will be leaving his role as sporting director of Manchester United by mutual agreement. We would like to thank Dan for his work and support during a transitional period for the club and wish him well for the future. Gary, just expand on why you think that's so poor.
Yeah, Manchester United haven't had a voice for 10 years. They've lost their authority, they've lost their boldness. I think they've been getting it back a little bit in the last 12 months. But what's really clear is that there is a fracture here. Something has happened. You can't bring somebody into the level of Dan Ashworth and then lose him after 5 months and think that something hasn't gone wrong. Fans are going to be now asking the question, what's gone wrong? They're going to speculate. It's going to leave huge voids. I think you're better off just punching us in the face with the truth sometimes when it's so obvious that there has been something that's gone wrong between the personalities of Dan Ashworth, Omar Barada, Dave Brailsford, whoever it is in this last few months that have obviously not got on with each other or it's not been working. Just tell us, because it's obvious that something has happened. I think that statement, to be honest with you, is weak.
Tim, this was supposed to be the great new era, the beginning of the turning around of the oil tanker that is Manchester United. The optics, apart from anything else, are brutal.
Yeah, they are. And I agree with so much of what Gary's saying. I mean, the issue for me is it's nearly, and we understand this, it's nearly impossible to run a football club. So many things happen, and that's okay. And that's okay. And so when you get something wrong, even if it's as big as Dan Ashworth, just come out and say, we got this wrong, because you're getting a lot of things right as you know, under their stewardship. So it's okay, and it's a big one, but what you do by not being more transparent is you just leave more questions than answers. And in a time at Manchester United where there's already speculation, where there's already a lack of trust. I mean, when you look at this, and we talk about him being headhunted from Newcastle, it can't possibly be just down to decisions. It has to be down to personality or a clash of personality, which I find hard to believe, because you've gone after this person. You've brought them in, as you said, for millions of pounds. You've done your homework. So the fact that there's possibly a clash of personalities surprises me, because when you look at the decisions, they brought Ten Hag back in the summer. That was a collective decision. You have to back the manager, so therefore you bring in signings. Okay, a lot of those are on Dan Ashworth, but he had to back the manager, and the manager has to have a say in those signings. So if those signings weren't right, that's not all down to Dan Ashworth. So then when you look at bringing in Amorim, that was a big Omar Barada call, mostly. So I'm baffled a little bit as to how it's gone pear-shaped so quickly.
Tim's right. It's very difficult to run a football club. There's a lot of emotion involved. It is very different than any other business. I sacked a manager at my small club, League Two, in Salford when I was the operating shareholder for 8 years after 5 months. Really clear, if you sacked a manager after 5 months, you've made a mistake yourself. You've not got something right. I had to come out and explain what went wrong, why it didn't go right, and ultimately you have to own your own troubles. I think with this one, I think that ultimately you are left with answering the questions. You know, did Dan Ashworth, has he left now because he didn't appoint Amorim? Has he left now because he doesn't get on with the CEO? Has he left now because of the performances in the last few weeks and he doesn't agree with the system of play? You're asking lots of questions that don't need to. It may just be really simple. Sometimes you appoint people in business and it doesn't work. And it's quite clear that you have all good intentions of it working and it doesn't work when you get through the door and you think, oh, I've made a mistake here, and you just have to correct it as quickly as possible. If that's the case, just tell us that and maybe we can move on. But obviously Dan Ashworth hasn't spoken. There's no statement from him. There's no statement from Omar Barada. There's no statement from anybody in particular. It's just a club statement that I say it needed more than that on this one, I think.
OK, well, let's bring in the man who broke the story along with Laurie Whitwell and Adam Crafton from The Athletic, David Ornstein. Another massive scoop from you, and it's great to talk to you this morning. David, just fill us in. You probably heard a little bit from Gary and Tim there, but how did we get to where we are this morning?
The first thing to say, Rebecca, is that Dan Ashworth is gone with immediate effect. He was called into a meeting at Old Trafford with a number of high-ranking executives from Manchester United, led by Omar Barada, after the defeat against Nottingham Forest. And this is where the decision was confirmed. And it's being presented by Manchester United as a mutual agreement. But I think it's pretty clear that this has been initiated on behalf of the club, Manchester United, and also Ineos, who of course have sporting control of Manchester United. Now, Dan Ashworth was a very high-profile appointment, and Manchester United went to great lengths to get him from Newcastle United. He spent a considerable amount of time on gardening leave. They paid £2-3 million to get hold of him. He started on July the 1st. And he's already gone 5 months later. He spent as much time on gardening leave as he has been working in the job. Clearly, the hierarchy at Old Trafford, at Ineos, led by Sir Jim Ratcliffe, were not happy with the job that he was doing. Whatever you think of Dan Ashworth, his reputation and his work. And it brings you towards a number of areas. Player recruitment, the summer just gone, another £200 million spent, and great questions over some of those recruits. The coaching situation with Erik ten Hag being backed initially and then being sacked. Sir Jim Ratcliffe has spoken in recent days to the United We Stand fanzine and been scathing of the data operation at Old Trafford, which technically falls under the wider remit of the sporting director. Also, the headcount. Manchester United have been making a huge amount of redundancies, and that would have had to have happened in the football department as well, led by Dan Ashworth. Does Sir Jim Ratcliffe feel that Dan Ashworth has done enough on that front? This is all part of the investigation that people like me will be doing in the coming days to really understand where things have gone wrong. Now, the rumblings of discontent were being heard by people like me for some time, but there was no suggestion that this was actually going to happen. We think it's come as a shock to most people inside Manchester United, even Dan Ashworth himself, ahead of that meeting. And now you look at what might happen next. We'll come on to talk about it shortly, but a point I would just make is that new regimes do encounter change. This is not completely unusual. It's just the shock factor, because Dan Ashworth was described, even by Sir Jim Ratcliffe, as being best in class, 10 out of 10 sporting director. And now he is gone. They want to win. It shows that they are quick and decisive in changing what they perceive to be errors, even by themselves. Now they'll be left to pick up the pieces, and they'll need to move on without Dan Ashworth.
David, it's Gary. Just one thing that I find slightly bizarre, and it's the timing of the actual decision. To actually call someone in at 8 o'clock on a Saturday evening who's a major employee at a club, why would it have been so... Why so impulsive? Why did it need to be done so quickly? Why not on a Monday morning when the dust has settled, the emotions aren't high after obviously a poor defeat at home? Why would it needed to have done so quickly after a match like that on a Saturday evening?
Yeah, I didn't manage to get all of that, Gary. I think you mentioned the timing of the announcement. Well, we don't know exactly why the announcement was made when it was, why the decision to inform him of this was made on Saturday evening after the match. Clearly it wasn't to do with the match specifically, but this would have been something that the leadership had been deliberating over for some time, and we often don't know the exact reasons and timings why these things happen, when there are normally some good reasons for it, however surprising it might be to the outside world. If we look at the leadership that is left behind and how it might shape up going forward, it's Sir Jim Ratcliffe at the top of the tree. You've got Jean-Claude Blanc on behalf of Ineos, Dave Brailsford, who's their director of sport and is very influential in all of this. You've got Colette Roach, the COO. And then on the football side, or the business and football side, Omar Barada, of course, as chief executive, having to hold this conversation with Dan Ashworth last night. Jason Wilcox, the technical director, we think he's very well thought of among the hierarchy, and also by Ruben Amorim, the head coach. Christopher Vivell working on recruitment. You've got Matt Hargreaves on negotiations. So you could say there are a lot of cooks here. There was a feeling among people I spoke to that the new regime had become too bloated already, and it was in need of being made a little bit leaner. I don't know if they will replace him. Maybe they will split the responsibilities, because the sporting director role is not easy now. You've got running a department, the men's side, recruitment, looking after the head coach, the women's, the academy. Perhaps there's a bit of a reshuffle. Perhaps somebody comes in to help on more the data side, which Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been so scathing about. And what next for Dan Ashworth? Does he go on gardening leave again? We'll have to wait and see. Does he pick up elsewhere? There are a number of clubs who are looking for sporting directors, and he is held in very high regard. So it's a bit of a sorry episode. It hasn't ended how anybody thought it would unfold as they embarked upon it. But United will have to move on now, Dan Ashworth too, and they will be desperately hoping that in time, under Ruben Amorim, they can actually start to bring about the progress that is so dearly needed. And there's so many other issues as well, the stadium, the ticket prices and more. But the focus here is on the sporting success. And Manchester United, Ineos, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, clearly didn't feel they were moving in the right direction under Dan Ashworth. And whatever the rights and wrongs of it, they're in charge of it now, and they will be judged by their decisions.
So good to hear from you, David Ornstein, our Premier League insider who broke that story today. Thank you so much. Gary, he talked a bit about it there. The new regime, they decided that they didn't want Erik ten Hag, but then actually they did want him for another year. Then they fired him into the season, not long into the season, brought in Amorim. They've raised ticket prices halfway through the season. They've cut funding, according to reports, to the Disabled Fans Association at Manchester United. They've made a ton of redundancies. Is there anything that they have done, and now this has happened, is there anything they've done that you've been impressed by?
No, I mean, some of those things were necessary changes that would have needed to have happened, and to be fair, they've made some unpopular decisions that, you know, you can back. There are also things that, to be fair, I think that they will not do again. I think ticket prices partway through a season is a no-no. I think you just make sure you do it at the start of next season. I don't think they'll do that again. Obviously, getting the appointment of Erik ten Hag, I actually could see why, after beating Manchester City, that they would want to try and keep it stable, even though it was a high risk. It was high risk bringing in someone else. What I would say is I don't think they will have... I mean, they knew this was going to be a really difficult job. I think it's probably hitting them this morning how difficult it's going to be. Although Jim Ratcliffe did say last week we've become a mediocre club. So I think when your owner that's come in who's spent over £1 billion of his own money is calling the club mediocre, he recognises that they're in a pretty bad place. The turbulence that they're having at this moment in time, they will not have expected. They now need a period of stability. They now need to almost, in some ways, just allow the season to sort of, if you like, continue and let the football do the talking. The problem is the football on the pitch is woeful. It really is. It's not good. So the football is not getting them out of trouble as well at this moment in time. So there's a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do.
Tim, final thoughts on this? This season feels like a write-off on and off the field.
It feels like a write-off, but, with Sir Jim Ratcliffe talking about it being a mediocre club, you do have to make swift decisions and tough ones. And look, they're not always going to be popular. So at this moment in time, if this is the course that he wants to go with, then certainly I'm okay with it. But as you said, you almost have to let things now play out.
Yeah.
Wow, what a story to start off your Sunday morning. Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe, studio host of NBC's coverage of the Premier League. Don't forget to hit subscribe to watch more videos all season long. And if you want even more Premier League content, from original series to live matches, head over to Peacock.